A House hearing ended abruptly Tuesday after a tense exchange between Republican and Democratic committee members regarding the misgendering of Rep. Sarah McBride, marking another instance of heightened political division over transgender rights. In Congress, the heated moment took place during a Foreign Affairs Subcommittee hearing on Europe. Rep. Keith Self, R. Texas, who chaired the hearing, referred to McBride, D. Dell, using male pronouns while recognizing her to speak. McBride, the first openly transgender member of Congress, quickly responded, leading to a sharp back and forth that resulted in the premature adjournment of the hearing. The exchange that led to an abrupt adjournment as the hearing progressed. Self turned to recognize McBride, stating, "I now recognize the representative from Delaware, Mr. McBride." Without hesitation, McBride responded with a calm but pointed retort, addressing Self as Madam Chair. The response immediately drew attention from other lawmakers present at the hearing, particularly from the subcommittee's ranking Democrat, Rep. Bill Keating of Massachusetts. Keating promptly interjected, demanding that Self repeat his remarks, and correctly address McBride, when Self instead doubled down on his initial misgendering. Referring again to McBride as Mr., he justified his language by claiming, "We have set the standard on the House floor." Keating, visibly frustrated, challenged Self's comments, stating, "Mr. Chairman, you are out of order. Mr. Chairman, have you no decency? I mean, I have come to know you a little bit, but this is not decent." As tensions in the room escalated, Self attempted to proceed with the hearing, but Keating refused to let the issue go. He asserted, "You will not continue it with me unless you introduce a duly elected representative the right way." In response, Self struck down his gavel and abruptly declared the hearing adjourned. Attendees began to shuffle out of the room, while Keating patted McBride on the shoulder in a show of support. The hearing had initially been scheduled to discuss State Department policies on arms control, international security, and U.S. assistance to European allies. However, those topics were left unaddressed, as the session ended prematurely due to the confrontation. McBride's response and the larger political context. Following the hearing, McBride issued a statement expressing disappointment over its abrupt conclusion. "I was disappointed that the chair decided to end a committee hearing early," McBride stated. "I was prepared to move forward with my questions for the subcommittee on nuclear non-proliferation and U.S. support for democratic allies in Europe." Despite the controversy, McBride reaffirmed her commitment to serving in Congress, emphasizing that she would not allow distractions to hinder her work. When reached by NBC News, a spokesperson for Keating declined to provide further comment, saying, "The video speaks for itself." Self's office also did not immediately respond to requests for comment. However, later that day, Self took to X, formerly Twitter, to defend his stance, writing, "It is the policy of the United States to recognize two sexes, male and female." Self's remarks echo language used in a John 20 executive order signed by former President Donald Trump, which declared that the federal government would only recognize two unchangeable sexes. This policy has been widely criticized by LGBTQ+ advocacy groups as an attempt to erase legal recognition of transgender and non-binary individuals. A pattern of misgendering and GOP opposition to McBride. This was not the first time that McBride had been misgendered by Republican lawmakers. Just weeks prior, on February 6, Reps. Mary Miller, R. Ill, referred to McBride as the gentleman from Delaware during remarks on the House floor. Initially, the Congressional Record revised her words to say, "Ms. McBride," but Miller later, and took issue with the correction, The official record now reflects Miller's original words as spoken. The Speaker pro tempore, Mrs. Miller of Illinois. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Delaware, Mr. McBride, for 5 minutes. The consistent pattern of misgendering McBride has drawn widespread criticism from LGBTQ+ advocacy organizations, fellow Democratic lawmakers, and human rights groups. Many view these incidents as part of a broader strategy by some Republican lawmakers to delegitimize McBride's role in Congress and undermine transgender representation in government. Republican efforts to target McBride's historic election in November marked a significant milestone for transgender representation in U.S. politics. However, even before she took office, she faced opposition from certain Republican lawmakers. Shortly after McBride's election, Rep. Nancy Mace, RSC, introduced a resolution aiming to ban transgender women from using female restrooms in the U.S. Capitol. The move was widely seen as a direct attack on McBride. When asked whether the resolution was specifically aimed at McBride, Mace responded, "Absolutely." House Speaker Mike Johnson, RLA, later reinforced this policy informally, restricting restroom access for transgender individuals in the Capitol. The policy was renewed at the start of the 119th Congress as part of a broader set of House rules. Under Republican leadership, despite the hostility, McBride has remained focused on legislative efforts rather than engaging in partisan battles over her identity. Speaking to NBC News in January, she stated that she refused to take the bait and allow the restroom policy to distract her from her work. "This is meant to diminish my capacity to be an effective member of Congress," McBride said. "But people who achieve historic firsts know that we have to pick our battles. My focus is on delivering results for my constituents." The broader debate over transgender rights in U.S. politics. The confrontation at Tuesday's hearing is part of a larger debate over transgender rights in the U.S., which has become a major cultural and political flashpoint. Republican lawmakers across the country have introduced a wave of bills aimed at restricting transgender rights, from banning gender-affirming healthcare for minors to limiting participation in sports and access to public facilities. In Congress, these debates have played out in committee hearings, floor speeches, and policy proposals that frequently target transgender individuals. Democratic lawmakers and LGBTQ+ advocates argue that such policies are discriminatory and harmful. They view McBride's election as a step forward in expanding representation and visibility for transgender people in politics. Conclusion: the abrupt ending of Tuesday's hearing underscores the deep political and cultural divisions surrounding transgender rights in the U.S. Congress. While Republican lawmakers like Self and Miller continue to challenge McBride's identity, Democratic colleagues and advocates have rallied around her, condemning what they view as deliberate attempts to undermine her role. As McBride forges ahead in her congressional career, she faces not only the typical challenges of a freshman legislator, but also the additional burden of being a historic first. Yet despite repeated attempts to delegitimize her, she remains focused on the work she was elected to do. Whether future hearings will be similarly disrupted remains to be seen, but one thing is certain: the battle over transgender rights in Congress is far from over.